transfigure, configure, refigure, prefigure, go figure. The transitional time that was the life of Paul, the life of Luke in this gospel. The transitional time was very, very difficult, very hard. We'd been through about 3 or 4 emperors by this time from Augustus. There had been emperors before Augustus, but we've been moving on, and some of them were good and some of them were bad. Well, I guess maybe we should not even use those words, because if you were a Jewish person living in, well, the world, your fortune was not particularly well looked after by the persons who were the emperors in Rome or the leadership of Rome. And some would say your well-being was not particularly well looked after. Your health and safety was not particularly looked after by most anyone unless it were you. But this is a time when that part of the world, that little crossroads of everyone and everything, was pretty much a vortex of energy. Talk about great northern storms, nor'easters. Talk about those. This place was a perpetual nor'easter for, I'm guessing, several hundred years. It's a place where a lot of things were being spawned. A lot of energy was being formed and used, and a lot of concepts and ideas were being generated. But one of the things that is important to remember is that the Judean faith, the faith that we recognize kind of centered itself in the temple in Jerusalem, that was not a faith. It was not a monolithic faith. It was a monotheistic faith, but it was not a monolithic faith. There were opinions all over the place about how things were to be done, and there were sects, S-E-C-T-S. I want to be really clear. That believed differently from other people who believed differently from other people. It was a time of challenge. It was very difficult. It was very difficult. The Old Testament often has books in it, and certainly the books of the law, the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible that we so often call the Old Testament. Those books are often etiologies. I've used that term before. They're descriptions of what people think happened at the beginning. They're descriptions of a construct of what people, how things happen now. Things are happening now. Well, the reason they're happening now is because this happened back then. And while the Gospel of Luke is not an etiology, I do believe that this story of the Transfiguration is a description of his understanding of something that was happening in the world. It was a description of something that was happening in the world. I can't really go much further without, of course, throwing your Trivial Pursuits question at you. You have to have one, because otherwise you wouldn't win the game so readily whenever you play, which I'm sure you do every Saturday night. But that wonderful story of Moses in Exodus. Moses goes up the mountain and he meets face to face with God, which itself is just a tremendous statement of the power and presence of Moses and the importance of this individual Moses, because one is not supposed to be able to be in the presence of the living God and surviving. And Moses not only survived once, twice, my guess is that it took a long time to figure out the exact wording of those 10 commandments and all the other laws that come down from God. And the expression, Moses comes back with his face so radiant he has to cover his face with a veil. Some of the Renaissance and earlier paintings of Moses and the Ten Commandments, maybe you remember there are little horns on Moses' head. Do you remember seeing any of these? Do you remember that? Just to have a look sometime, when you get a chance to look at some pictures of Moses and the Ten Commandments and the tablets coming down, there are these horns on Moses' head. And the reason they're there is because that is a translation of the horns of light. The cornu is the I believe is the Latin cornu, the horns of light. And so this is where this whole idea of Moses having horns and things, it's just incredible how these things take place and how these translations make a difference in the world. So when you see that, you'll be able to say, well, that's kind of a mistranslation. That's actually supposed to be, those are supposed to be rays of light coming out of Moses' face. What is it about? What is it about? We have in this moment when this wonderful transfiguration takes place. What is a transfiguration? What is it? What is transfiguration? What is it? Anybody want to have a shot at that one? What is a transfiguration?
Changing from one form into another.
It is a change. It's a radical change, isn't it? It is almost like an entire restructuring. And does anyone else have the same kind of curiosity I have, that Jesus is standing there on this hilltop and there are these two individuals immediately, they're appearing with Jesus, and of course, who are they? Who are with him? James, John, Peter. They immediately recognize Moses and Elijah. From what do they recognize these two guys? How do they know that's who that is? Well, that guy's got horns. Must be Moses. Isn't that interesting? Isn't it really interesting? What is going on? The Romans, when we look at the Roman attitudes toward that part of the world, this was a place where they were just drawing their own energy. They were drawing wealth, and they were drawing resources, and they were building a kind of a barrier between themselves and the Parthians, among others, who lived that little bit further east. They didn't really acknowledge or weren't much concerned with what was happening among the Jewish people and those Jewish persons who were beginning to follow this Jewish person by the name of Jesus. In fact, the term Christian, when it first was used, was a pejorative term. Those Christians. Just like now. It's often used as a pejorative term. Those Christians. The Christian right, the Christian left, the Christian center. The Romans weren't much concerned about it, but there was something going on. Something going on, something formative happening. Something formative was happening. And why would people go up a mountain? In those days, why would people go up a mountain? This is actually a fairly easy question. Why would people go up a mountain?
To get away from the people.
To get to the top.
To get to the top. And that's why the person like me who has absolutely no courage crosses the road. Chicken crosses the road. People go up mountains because they're closer to God. They're closer to God up on these mountains. And what's really fun when you do the studies of this thing, you'll appreciate this. There are people that actually argue over which mountain this was. Okay. Yeah, it was that mountain. Sure, it was that mountain. Yeah, there was that mountain. Do we really need to know? No, we do not. We need to know that they went up a mountain to be closer to God because something important was happening and Luke was trying to describe it. And what's also interesting to me is that the optional section of this scriptural passage is that they came down from the mountain and the first thing they had to do is go to work. The first thing they had to do was face the reality of life, that there are demons down there and it's tiring work and Jesus is... His energies are being drawn upon and the whole bit. And all of this, in spite of what happened up there with those two persons that are defined as Elijah and Moses. What is going on? What is going on? We don't even know what are the nature of some of the character of what's going on in the Christian part of this Judean, this Jewish understanding. Well, in the early part of the 2nd century, Pliny, who was the supporter of the Emperor Trajan, wanted to find out about Christians, so he just got himself a couple of Christian women and tortured them. And they told him what he needed to know. And he says, we don't need to worry about Christians. And that's pretty much the way that story is reported. Yeah, take a couple of Christians and torture them and you'll get what you need to know and we don't need to worry about it. But something was happening. Christianity was forming. Christianity was forming. Mountains. Briefly, this morning, in the brief conversations back in the sacristy, Linda used an expression which actually was important to what I wanted to bring to you today. She said it's something about perspective. It's about perspective. It's all about perspective. It's all about perspective. How are we viewing the world? How are we viewing the world? What is it that is changing? What is inside of us? How do we perceive our relationship with God and the world? How do we perceive that? How do we perceive the world? And how does one actually change perspective? Well, it occurred to me this week that in order to change your perspective, you don't necessarily have to move mountains. In order to change your perspective, sometimes it just simply takes a tilt of the head or the change of pitch. We are entering Lent. We are entering Lent this very week. Wow. Whichever one of you took my January, I'd like to have it back. We are entering Lent. And I want us to take the time in Lent to adjust our perspective. Each of us have our own understanding. Each of us have our own viewpoint. And they are constantly changing, for the most part. And so I want us together during Lent, I want us to look at our own perspective, and I want us to kind of maybe tilt our head a little bit. I don't want us to radically change anything unless you come to the conclusion that a radical change is needed. But that conclusion will not come from me. I want you to look at the way you look. I want you to help me look at the way I look. I want to examine this thing that binds us together, this faith that we call Christianity. I want us to find and look at it as we understand it. I want us to shine light on it in a different way. And I'm not asking you to move a mountain. I'm only asking you to have a look. And I'm even more, I guess, asking you to help me have a look at mine. The Transfiguration is a statement that Jesus was coming from something. It's a definition, it's a description of what Jesus was coming from. And interestingly enough, it is placed in Luke's Gospel right at the point where Jesus is going to. That Moses and Elijah describe where Jesus was coming from. And in the next chapter of Luke, he begins the journey to. He starts heading to Jerusalem. Let us look together. Let us look together. Let's have a look. Take a few minutes every day and have a look. You don't have to change the recipe. Let's look at it. And let's see where we go. Let's have a look at what we are going to.
Also laying up from the bunker. That's also a very good layout. Good balance there.